Hello friends, we are here to review The Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. My camera is a little bit higher today. I kind of like it up here. I'm gonna say, we're at mid-season. I'll get to the tea later, but let's start with the episode. So we start off the episode with Kyle and Mauricio, and immediately whenever they film, there's just no type of chemistry. Like, I wonder if producers are just like, hey, we need a scene between y'all two because they know that the rumors are there, I guess, and they want to see the dynamics. But it doesn't seem like they're like genuinely wanting to film. And then they kind of at the end get up as if they're leaving a board meeting, and Kyle's trying to like jug and finesse around Mauricio, and he like sneaks in a kiss, and it was just. But then there's still no confirmation or anything about the relationship. Like, she was talking about the dinner and the fact that people are questioning her about the rumors, and Mauricio was just like, did you tell them to F off? And she's like, no. So okay. I'm just kind of tired of the non-substantive conversation. Like, if we're gonna watch Kyle and Mauricio have conversation, let's talk about something. We move on, and Sutton is preparing for a party for her store. She wants to celebrate. I think she said it's been 4 years, and she opened it around 2020, I believe, or something like that. No shade to Sutton at all, but I was just wondering, like, because it's like a boutique, right? And so it was opened around like 2020. So I was just wondering, like, how does she keep her boutique open during COVID? Now, I know Sutton got the coin, so I was just wondering, like, is Sutton funding her own business? No shade, but I'm just like, are people really shopping there, or is this Sutton's doing? But regardless, good for her. And while she's there, kind of like doing a walkthrough for the party, she talks to Crystal, which I thought was interesting because I always wonder where their relationship lies, but they're FaceTiming, so they must be good. And then Crystal kind of asked her, because Crystal's playing producer this year, and I live, and Crystal's asking her, are you excited for Kyle to come, or do you want Kyle to come? And she's like, not if we're going to fight. And she brings up the fact that Crystal told her, I guess, that it wasn't only Kyle, having a conversation about the drinking thing, but it was also Dorit. And we didn't get to see that, and we also didn't get like a flashback of it. So I'm like, okay, you guys are cutting things out, and I need to know. Like, that would have been something good to know. And Sutton's whole thing is like, she's upset about it for obvious reasons, but she gives her context, and she says this can hurt her business, and then she also says it can affect her child, and this whole custody thing kind of comes back around. And I'm wondering, like, how old is this child? Like, how much could it really affect it? Not that I don't think it can affect it, but I'm just wondering, like, how old is this child? Kyle is now seeing her therapist or life coach or something like that. I didn't catch the title. And she does give some really good context as to where she is, because I would have to agree with Sutton that Kyle doesn't really talk about her life. And then we see these scenes that I just talked about where she sits with Mauricio and nothing of substance is discussed. So it's nice seeing her sit down and talk. At first I was like, because she started talking about Kathy, and I'm like, oh my God, we're going to keep hearing this same thing. Like, it's just like we never turn the corner with Kyle. Like, we know that there's an issue, but we never kind of assess. But then she starts to talk about the fact that, her best friend since she was 7 passed away. And then she's talking about at that very same time, she's going through the stuff with Kathy. And at that very same time, she's going through the stuff in her marriage. So all three of those things happening at the same time are really affecting her, and that makes sense. And that's the type of context that you need for a personal story and for people to be able to empathize with you. So I'm happy that she was able to give us that context. And, obviously a therapist can only go off of what you tell them. So the therapist and Kyle are kind of talking about, and if they're not a therapist, I apologize, I don't know. But the therapist and Kyle are talking about, creating a safe space and, being able to have an environment where you can make yourself better again. And she kind of talks about, keep having certain people around and working out and being healthy with her body. And I'm like, okay, cool, more context. But again, towards the end, the therapist is just like, if people are being judgmental, then it kind of is what it is. Everything else was great, but I cannot subscribe to the narrative that people are judging Kyle, because that's just not how I feel. I feel like people are asking Kyle questions because she's not giving any context. We don't know what the heck is going on, but nobody's judging her. So I'm kind of tired of hearing that. When I say kinda, I mean like drastically exhausted. We're just now getting an Anne Marie intro, and I'm trying to give her a fair chance, but the way that she was ushered in doesn't really do her any favors and doesn't do us any favors either. The only thing that we know is that she loves to work out. And so, we see her. I still don't really feel like I learned very much. We got to see her family, which I think was great, and she had a very beautiful home. I was also wondering because she was describing like the relationship with her husband, and he's an athlete, so he had tons of women after him, typical story. But she was saying, well, he said what made her different is that she's a solid 8.5 in all avenues, like all things, like looks and personality and all types of stuff like that. And I'm just wondering, like, if my man, if I ever had a man, were to tell me that, would I take that as a compliment? We move on, and Erica is calling her mom to tell her that she's gotten this Las Vegas residency. And I'm just like, okay, so when did that happen? Because just last episode or the episode before that, she was meeting up at the bar in WeHo to talk about the idea. And now we've jumped, skipped, and hopped to the point where she was, first of all, even considered for a residency, then presented with a contract, then went through the negotiations, and then signed said contract. So I'm like, why do we miss all of those things? Like, that felt like that could have been a full storyline. Did I care? Not 100%, but I feel like that's something that I could have jumped into, because aside from that, it just feels like Erica's kind of playing the back this season. So that kind of makes me feel like, and I kind of felt like that before anyway, like when they were in WeHo, it kind of felt like the wheels had already started turning on the Vegas thing, and they kind of had to play catch up from a production standpoint. So they're like, let's, set this fake scene where you're in WeHo and you appeal to the gays, and you're like, oh my God, I really want to do a Las Vegas residency, while it probably was already in play. That's my opinion. And so now they're like, okay, we got that out the way. There's the context, so we can just say the contract is signed. So I think that was definitely a ball being dropped. But, her contract is that she signed on for 20 days, or 20 shows, in Vegas. And I think that's great. It's moments like this where Kyle is just so very annoying, because she's getting ready for Sutton's event and she's on the phone with Morgan, and she does this so very well, the whole deflection thing and the whole like victim thing. Like, she always is so good at being like, oh, like, well, if I do this, like, maybe they'll judge me, or like, oh, like, maybe if I do this, then they'll come at me, or like, oh, like, Kyle, like, get the hell off the soapbox. Like, nobody has done anything to you. Like, shut up. I don't know if I'm the only person that feels this way, but Kyle just feels like she will beat the hell out of a dead horse. And it's just like, shut up and stop calling Morgan and having these pillow talks, but then trying to convince us that that's not your bae. Girl. We get to Sutton's event, and Dorit is walking in, and she, they make it a point to give us a confessional of Dorit saying, oh, well, Sutton gave me a heads up that there'll be about 80 people here, so I was able to prepare myself. And I just wonder, like, is this Dorit's storyline this season? Like, having anxiety and needing a heads up before she goes to events? Like, I'm sure that's a very real thing, but you don't have to mention it so often. Like, we get it, we got it. I also thought Garcelle looked absolutely fabulous. Like, sometimes she kind of misses the mark, but she looked great. So when Kyle's pulling up, I'm clocking the T that Sutton had clocked, but there was really no T to clock because Kyle clocked her own T. But she was saying, oh, I'm bringing Kim, her sister, to the event, and she's like, so I'm going to prove Sutton wrong. Like, I didn't lose two sisters. And it's like, Kyle is literally like a schoolgirl. Like, literally, like, she grabs onto a point, she doesn't let it go, and then she's going to do everything in her power to kind of rebut that point. But what she doesn't realize is we've already made the point, we said what we said, and we ain't coming up off of it, no matter what you do. So she comes with Kim, and Sutton's like, girl, I clocked that T. Like, but Kyle, Kyle's not dumb, but, she brought her sister to show this. Oh my gosh, she's so close to her sister. It's like, oh, it's like, but Kyle, girl, please. Like, she's always trying to prove something, but it's never real. So I don't understand. I love that Sutton, like, honestly, we don't have a season without Sutton. We just don't. We don't have it. And I love that when she's giving her speech for her event, she just kind of jumps right into it. She's like, I love labels tonight. Typically I don't love the labels of, other women putting labels on other women, but I love labels tonight. And the girls are already like, okay, she's on one. And I'm like, I'm so excited. After she gives her speech, she's like, okay, now I'm gonna have my cocktail. And I love that she went up to Kyle to let her know. And she's like, girl, okay, I'm gonna have a little drink now. I'm just coming over to ask mom for permission, and just so you know, like, this is my first one of the day. And Kim is literally doing this to Kyle. And Kyle's like, girl, I know what she's talking about. And I'm like, no, girl, you don't even know the half of it. But we're gonna tell you. And Kim like leans over to Kyle. She's like, well, this obviously this is a little bit deeper. So Kyle kind of leans over and grabs Sutton because Sutton hadn't gotten too far. Still hadn't gotten her cocktail, I don't think. I'm like, damn, now she got to have a deep conversation without her cocktail. I would hate that. But, Kyle's like, okay, obviously you feel some type of way about what was said the other night. And I'm thinking the whole time, like, she about to dig herself into a hole because it's not just about the other night. But Kyle's thinking that, it's just from what happened at Kyle's house, and that's the only point that they talked about the drinking thing, which it absolutely was not. The tea is that Crystal has, told Sutton the conversation. But in this is Kyle's way of covering up and saying, like, basically saying, I never said you had a drinking problem. She's like, I was only speaking on it in that one moment. And then she used an example. And she's like, I had too much to drink at Garcelle's party last year. Like, that's just one night. That doesn't mean it's a problem. And it's like, you're making a point, but that's surface, and that's not where we are. Like, you did imply that she had a drinking problem. You brought it up more times than that. But Sutton, you can tell that Sutton just don't be wanting to get into it. And Sutton, I think, I'm not mad that she sat on the Crystal thing. Like, I think she definitely could have brought it up and said, girl, that's not the only time that you brought it up. And it could have been more of a conversation, and it could have been more entertaining for this boring show. But she didn't. And I guess obviously she wants to move forward, so fine. And she just says, okay, well, let's clarify that. Meaning, like, don't throw things out there like they're allegations that I have a drinking problem. Like, let's be clear. And Kyle's like, well, let's be clear about what you said about me, like, at the party. And Sutton, to Sutton's credit, Sutton's like, well, girl, I really didn't do anything. Like, I'm not even the one that brought up the, like, makeup ring thing. That was Garcelle. And Kyle seems kind of hell-bent on thinking, like, well, even if it was Garcelle, she's repeating something that you told her. And I'm like, where did you get that from? Like, there's absolutely no breadcrumbs that lead to that assumption, because, what do you mean? And Sutton also says, which I thought was an excellent point, but again, we know how, Kyle likes to grab onto things and not let them go. So it's like, girl, that's only one piece of it. Like, that little ring thing, that's really not even like and I think I said that last review, like, that's not even anything. Like, at the end of the day, we're talking about a whole overview of what people say about your marriage. And then obviously we get Sutton in the confessional. She didn't say anything too deep, but it was just like, rumors are that, Mauricio cheated and that they both have moved out of the house, whatever. Typical stuff. But it ain't about no ring. Like, Kyle, you can't possibly think that it's about a ring. But they do clock that she has on another new ring tonight. And they went through a whole description. They don't think it's a wedding ring. So, might be more to that. But Sutton calls over Garcelle, and, Kyle kind of asked her to clarify. She's like, yeah, Sutton's telling me that, she wasn't the one that brought up the makeup ring thing. It was you. And Garcelle says, yeah, it was me. I did say that. And I didn't think that was any question, because she said it at the table. So it came out of Garcelle's mouth herself. She said it. Why is there a question? And Garcelle is asking the hard-hitting questions because, again, Kyle's on her. We're already at mid-season, and Kyle is still denying everything, so when are we going to turn the corner? But anyway, Garcelle is asking good questions like, girl, even if there was something, like, would you be owning up to it? Like, would you admit it? Like, would you really? And Kyle's like, of course. So, okay, sure. But now, for whatever reason, Dorit is in it, and she is trying to pick apart the story, I guess, but from a more helpful point of Kyle. And so she's telling Kyle, or like asking Kyle to, I guess, spell out, like, okay, so you feel some type of way because Sutton was talking about your marriage behind your back. And I'm like, why are you adding this extra seasoning on it? And why are we re-having this conversation because I thought we just had it. Sutton shut that down. She's like, well, girl, speaking of talking about people behind their back, like, I definitely heard that you were talking about me having a drinking problem. Like, Crystal told me. And Dorit goes, she kind of started to try to, like, deny it, but that Crystal told me came out so quickly that she really didn't have anything to say. And so Dorit got into her confessional. She had a cute little read. Like, was she wrong? No. She's like, Crystal doesn't usually say much. This is where she was wrong, though. But she was like, now Crystal is being a carrier pigeon for Sutton. And I'm like, no, she's just holding the girls accountable, just being a little honest, actually being hilarious. And so since she can't really lie, she doesn't really have a leg to stand on, she's like, I'll figure it out with Crystal. So she goes to approach Crystal. This could have been juicy because we're getting a Sutton and Kyle back and forth, and then Garcelle's kind of in it, and now Crystal's going to go confront, Dorit, and now Dorit's going to go confront Crystal. So this could have been juicy, but it wasn't. Because at the end of the day, like I said, Sutton seems like she just wants to move on. So she and Kyle apologized. I knew it wasn't a real apology, like really, really, even before Sutton got into her confessional. She's like, yes, we apologize, but we both, and I love that she's taking the ownership and saying we both. Does she need to? I don't think so. But she takes the ownership and she's like, we both said nasty things, so we're both going to have to lick those wounds and move forward. I don't believe they're going to move forward. So they probably should have just hashed it out, but whatever. Kyle is backlogged with like hashing things out, okay? This was honestly the funniest part of the episode. Like, this is when I sat up in my seat and I actually had to get some joy and some laughter in my heart. So Dorit walks up to Crystal and she seems like she's trying to get into it. Like, she's a little spicy as soon as she comes up to Crystal. Like, I think she's expecting Crystal to back down. And to her credit, assumed credit, Crystal has fumbled quite a bit. Like, in reunions when they were on Crystal, like, Crystal would stutter and not really say much and articulate herself well, but Crystal is standing on business these days, okay? And I'm catching it. Like, soon as Dorit walked up, I'm catching it with Crystal. I'm like this with Crystal. We're playing pitch and catch. And Dorit walks up. She's like, so what is this with you going around and telling Sutton that I was talking about her drinking? So I'm already thinking, like, what do you mean going around? If she can't go around and go directly to Sutton. Like, she can't do both. As soon as I'm finishing my thought, Crystal's saying it like, by going around, do you mean going to Sutton? And I'm like, yes! Dorit corrects herself. She's like, yeah, you went to Sutton and said that I'm going around saying that she's drinking. Crystal's like, another correction. I said what you said when we were at Kyle's house. Like, you and Kyle were both talking about her having a drinking problem, and that's what I told her. And I'm like, exactly. So then Dorit goes into this whole long thing, which they chopped, screwed, and edited because I know that she was not saying anything of substance. And she was kind of just like talking around it and saying, well, I didn't really do this, and I didn't really do this, and I didn't really. At the end of the day, you implied that Sutton had a drinking problem. And that's what Kristen told Sutton. And that's what Sutton told you. The end. Crystal actually, like, the fact that production even just kind of skipped through that, and we got to hold the side by side of Crystal just being over it, and like, girl, that is the best thing that I've seen on this show this season.
I didn't say she likes to drink. She's a drinker. I'm a Southern woman. We have a drink. Blah, blah, blah. I'm bored.
They get back in the group, and Crystal clarifies, which I don't feel like needed clarification because I feel like we talked about this, but she clarifies that it was both Kyle and Dorit that were having a conversation about Sutton drinking, and I'm like, I feel like the issue here has gotten lost. Like, why are we talking semantics of who said what and how did they say it? At the end of the day, the story was Kyle and Dorit implied that you had a drinking problem, and that is what Sutton addressed hours ago. So I don't know why we went this way around to come right back to where we started, but okay. Anne-Marie is kind of like trying to get a read in, and the context behind her read is lost because she's saying it behind Sutton's back. So she's sitting there and Kyle's to her side and Sutton's kind of like diagonal from her. So she's turning to Kyle and she's like, well, Sutton's making up all this hoopla about you, but she's talking about stuff that doesn't make sense, as it pertains to her medication and as it pertains to her esophagus. But then she'll turn to Sutton and start asking her medical questions instead of just saying, hey, I feel some type of way about you trying to call Kyle out, so let me call you out. Like, she should have just said that, and I feel like the read would have come off cleaner. But because she did not do that, she became the read. And it was like, why are you here? Why are you talking? She first brings up, because in Sutton's conversation with Kyle, and I guess other people were around, Dorit included, and Garcelle was there, she was explaining, yes, I'm on medication for my feet, but that has nothing to do with my drinking. Like, I can drink on that medication, so there's no problem in that type of space. So then Anne-Marie was saying, well, girl, I heard that, and like, I'm assuming she's like, you have a problem with your esophagus, right? And she's like, yeah. And she's like, well, I'm assuming that you take no. She's like, you have a whatever. She asked Sutton about whatever her illness is, not the esophagus, the other thing. And Sutton's like, yes. And she's like, so I'm assuming you take blah blah blah. She said the name of the medication, and Sutton's like, yes. And I'm like, this is already weird. And then she's like, well, I heard you say that you could drink with it, but you can't. And she thought that was a boom boom shh. Like, give her a 3-year contract for Housewives. She has eaten it. Like, she thought that she cleared that, and it was like, okay, and Sutton's like, immediately, she's like, well, my doctor said that I could. And she's like, but you can't. And Sutton said, but my doctor said that I could. Is this not a HIPAA violation? Like, the girl said that her doctor said that she could. And even if the doctor said that she couldn't, she's doing it. So that fails. She goes back and she kind of confers with Kyle a little bit more. Kyle ain't said nothing. Kyle ain't said a word. Clock that T. And then she comes back from Kyle. Kyle kind of helps her fill in at this point, though, because Kyle kind of introduces it, because this is the T. This information was not given to Anne-Marie by Sutton. So there's no context here either. Like, there's no reason that Anne-Marie would even have this information. So Kyle ushers it in, and then she sits back and she's quiet again. But she's like, yeah, we talked a little bit about your esophagus thing. And Sutton's like, okay, yeah, like, I have a narrow esophagus. Like, my brother also has one, like, whatever. And Anne-Marie starts trying to diagnose that. She's like, okay, but and Sutton says, I'm not on medication for that. So she definitely lets her know that. And she's like, okay, well, but I don't understand. Like, if you have a small esophagus, I don't understand why you don't eat. Like, if you had a small esophagus, you would probably eat more to stretch it out. All this stuff that just does not matter. And at this point, I'm on Twitter like, because I'm like, who the hell asked her? Like, why are we having this conversation? Why does this matter? Like, you're trying to hold her accountable for what's going on with her esophagus? And she's like, well, you're saying things that don't make sense. She didn't say it to you. She told Kyle. And Kyle told you. And then you formed an opinion about it. Nobody told you anything. Like, nobody cares. And Sutton is reading her down. Like, honestly, Sutton and Crystal carried this episode. So it's like, girl, like, why am I having a doctor's appointment right now? Like, do you need my medical card? And Anne-Marie wants to be like, she's so condescending. Girl, no, she's trying to figure out why you're in her business. Like, what difference does it goddamn make? So I don't really know if things with Anne-Marie are gonna really stick for me, but I'll tell you the truth. Since we're at mid-season, nothing with this season is sticking with me, honestly. Like, it's really kind of boring, really kind of dry. Honestly, without Sutton and maybe a little bit of Crystal, we have nothing. We got nothing. Like, the fact that they even let Kyle go through the first half of the season giving nothing, like, we have not moved forward on any type of story with Kyle. Erica ain't talking about nothing. Dorit ain't talking about nothing. Like, we get great moments with Garcelle and her kids. Great. That's beautiful personal story. But there has to be something going on in the group. Ain't nothing going on in the group. Garcelle is holding the girls accountable as she typically would, but fine. Crystal's storyline with her brother, that's keeps fading in and out, and they touch on it when they want. So I just don't know what we're supposed to be focusing on this season. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what the story is. I don't know if and when it's going anywhere. So I want to love it. I want to. Because the previews are much better than the episodes. And even the flashback of the dinner was more exciting than the actual dinner episode. So I'm like, they're trying, and there's obviously potential there, but it's flat lining as hell. Like, y'all didn't even give us a proper intro to your new housewife. There's no hype around her. All she's doing is HIPAA violating Sutton. So I don't know what we're doing here. But I'm gonna keep on watching, and we will see in the next one.